That little joke with the punching, I think Kyle had inserted that into the boards, and it was a lot of people wanted to cut it out. Mary Harrington, I believe, wanted to cut it out, and Jonan wanted to cut it out. They just didn't understand. They didn't understand why it was there or what the point was, and it was just supposed to be a fun little visual. They still have no idea to this day why in animation most executives want to cut things. It's as if the idea that was put in was not what they were expecting. Executives generally want to cut things out, and they generally bland down shows that way, uh, rather ignorantly. There's a lot of hard work being put into these sorts of into this sort of thought to make a show more interesting visually and gag oriented, even if the gag doesn't pertain 100% to the story, and it doesn't hurt the story or hurt anything in the scene, the characters or so. They want to cut it, and you end up with cartoons that are made of uh, everything being cut. I mean, if anything is interesting sometimes, or even funny, or they haven't seen it before, they don't understand it, anything, they want to cut it, even though the director or the crew or even the creator might find it, a really nice addition to the show. You end up with bland cartoons. This shot really blew everybody's mind. This shot in 3D going through the planets, through the stars. It's what we wanted to do in the beginning of the first series when you go down to Earth. But, to see Dib. But we did it this time with Zim and sort of tried to match it up to 2D. One of the most intense shots, I think, probably the only time you'll ever see it in animation, is a shot drifting across the galaxy from one end of the universe to the other, going right through the ground. Now, granted, we did cross dissolve in the ground to come into a 2D, into Zim's 2D area, but the intention that we originally had, which we didn't have time to pull off properly, was that actually the 2D and the 3D would match up a bit more, and we'd wipe and get into that 2D, so it almost looked seamless. But really magnificent shot, and I mean, that's like one of those great shots, like that big battle scene in Dib's Wonderful Life of Doom. It's one of those ones that wow, you're just amazed by it. It's a really great piece of television. Actually, like a movie. I think a lot of this show, this episode, plays off like a movie, in fact. The cinematography, the action, and the effects. Originally here there was a donut print. A donut was supposed to have flopped on the camera, and there was a little ghost donut over there. And when the tallest pops up here, Purple wipes the donut with his tongue. The donut stain off the camera, and then gets tossed. And I never quite liked the voiceover, the ADR that was done on this series, or on this episode, I should say. There's very little energy going on, and it wasn't strong enough to convey that that's a joke or that's interesting. It just sounded cheap and lazy, and it was cheap and lazy. There's really no other reason for it to have so little energy. These screens were all very difficult to composite and come up with. Almost every scene in this show has 2 or 3 things going on, and very difficult effects, like that backlit line going down to Dib's face. This half of this episode is just really something else. I mean, a technical feat, and it looks great. It was animated really well. The explosion out of the sun that you saw there in the last episode was actually taken from Footy Cootie. Almost precisely ripped off, I'd say. Or FLCL, it's an anime. I have sort of these nice little nods, like, somebody please respond. Nice little nods to current internet protocol. This is now Ray Angram's section. Ray Angram, one of our newer artists on the show. He did parts of Hamstergeddon and Lice and Future Dib, along with other shows. And he was really coming along quite a bit too. Zim, I think, was his first real storyboard job. He had come from Sony. I think he came from Sony, where he did storyboard revisions or cleanups. And boy, he conquered this stuff with zest. He got onto the series, and he tried. He did better and better. Very slow at first, but got good. He was good with everything, deadline and product by the end. Really getting better. Like the whole staff was improving at this time. Ray was a really funny character just as a person. Big black guy. And Uh, Jonah and I hired him when we were in Korea, I believe, the first time in 2000, and we got back, and here's this guy who we hired for boards. We loved his boards. We saw him over there, and he called himself the Booty King, I think is what it was, or people called him the Booty King. He wore these very tight T-shirts, and one that he had particular was a Burger King logo, but it said Booty King. He had this really funky thing. He was just into funk music, and he was into that 70s black culture, that sort of stuff. A really, really funny guy. Really great with the women. Just a character. But very low key. Trying to do a lot of warp perspectives. We tried to always add warp perspectives into the show every once in a while. Didn't want to do too many of them. It would overload the senses, but occasionally we try to do these warps. And I remember it was a hassle for everybody to try and figure out warps on perspectives, and it is a difficult thing to do. It's basically taking a fisheye camera or a part of a fisheye camera lens and working it into drawing. So it's very easy to get it wrong. And it can look really horrible. That shoe joke, that was taken from Fight Club, I believe. The artist who did this section took the little foot kick shoe flying off from Fight Club when everybody tries to pick a fight. It's great. As you look through these shows, you can just see all these little bits and pieces that were ripped off. Intentionally, I should say, from movies, great movies and interesting entertainment. This episode wasn't quite as well done. You can see like these guys there, the parents don't quite adhere to the walls as they crawl down. It just wasn't as well thought out. Oh, this is great. I think this is my idea for a joke. I can't remember, but yeah, I had to make this thing work. It might have been in the script. But again, it all played into that Gurr sort of, whatever Gurr does simplifies or perverts everything into a game or something simple, or just, he turns anything ridiculous, any situation. You see that downshot on Dib's head? Very difficult to figure out downshots on characters' heads in this series. And it sort of became a hassle between me and Jonan. Jonan wanted the characters just to look good. I wanted to do interesting cinematography with all sorts of cool perspectives and good choice of shots and such. And when you start to do that, you start to realize the limitations of these characters. They were drawn as graphic illustrations, at least the heads, I should say. The rest of the characters generally had good bodies that worked in full 3D space, but the heads didn't. And if you really try to think about it, you'll notice particularly the chins just don't work. I mean, the front of the head a box or a point? How does this all work? And even towards the end, we still hadn't mastered that. That still was an issue. And almost every shot that we did was a cheat. Some people liken this sequence to group masturbation. And look at her nub of hair that comes through, almost phallic. One of the few times you get like absolutely obvious Zim sexual reference, I think. I think Jonan always came up with great dialogue for those computers, or whoever came up with that dialogue. Really good. And that was Jonan's voice, of course. We had to rework a bit of the end of this after it came back animated to explain how all this worked, all these signals and such. Some of this really was lacking depth. This scene here, actually, Dib originally, there's a joystick in there that was sticking up. New York told us to change it. There you can see the joystick. New York changed it because they felt that it looked like Dib was going to have oral sex with this joystick. And this line, "Get your filthy meat out of the cockpit," was seen as something as a sexual reference. That with that joystick that was rather penile and Dib's mouth like right over it. It was just too much for New York to handle. I don't know. They were looking for these things. And it might have even been done intentionally, the placement and all that and the drawing of it. But I don't think, unless if you're thinking in that way, it ever comes off as sexual. And I can't imagine kids seeing that and, starting to think about sex or, such, going in those directions.